Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. Today, we're discussing tech stacks, what they are, why they're important, and how to optimize your own construction tech stack. My name is Laura Beth Ezel. I'm with Construction Dive Studio ID team, and I'll be your moderator. Before we get started, let's go through some quick tips to make sure your webinar experience is the best it can be. At the bottom of your screen are resizable and movable application widgets. Feel free to move them around to make the most out of your desktop space. The slides will advance automatically during the presentation. If you need to enlarge them, simply click the Enlarge Slides button in the top right corner of the presentation window. If you need technical assistance, click the Help widget in the bottom left corner at any time. Now, as the presentation gets underway, you may submit questions using the Q&A widget. We will answer as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. If a more informative answer is needed, or if we run out of time before we answer your question, we will follow up via email. After today's presentation, you will receive a link with on-demand access to the webinar so you can watch it again at any time, as well as share the content with colleagues. Well, now I'd like to welcome our experts today. First, let me introduce Christian Berger. Christian, thanks for being with us today. Tell our audience a little bit about you.
Yeah, Laura, thank you so much for the invitation. Glad to be here. My name is Christian Berger, president of Berger Consulting Group. I've been serving the construction industry for a little over 30 years, 25 of which has been at Berger Consulting Group, based in Chicago. We're an IT consulting firm that helps construction firms with their tech stacks. We evaluate them, we implement them, we select software as part of that. So pretty well versed, shall we say, in the subject at hand, and also all of the sort of challenges that our industry has faced with deployment. In addition to being president of the firm, I do a little bit of teaching at Northwestern, McCormick School, in a technology course, and I do occasional speeches at conferences, trade shows for the industry as well. Delighted to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Christian. So also joining us today is Brian Poage with Raken. Brian, tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, of course. Happy to be here. After studying construction management at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, I actually started my career with Turner Construction and spent 5 years almost at Turner as a field engineer, a project engineer down in San Diego, and then was promoted to a superintendent up in Los Angeles, where I was able to work on some amazing projects, including the Wilshire Grand Tower, which is at the time was the largest tower on the west side of the Mississippi. After 4 years of Turner, I decided to take an opportunity with a project manager role with a developer, Holland Partner Group out of Los Angeles, and was there for 2 years, and then went on to work at WeWork during their astronomical growth in their in-house construction group as a project manager. And so it was a really unique opportunity to run my own projects and help open over 1 million square feet of co-working space in about a 2-year period. And while I was at WeWork, I actually used Raken, which is a software built for field data collection. My superintendents were giving me their data reports and their daily reports, and it really helped me as a project manager effectively manage my projects in a more dynamic way than I had previously been able to. And so as I learned more about the company, I was actually offered a position to come work for them as a construction support manager, which I took on the role about 2 years ago. And so now I work with our sales team every day to help them better understand the people that we work with in the construction industry, what they care about, what pain they're experiencing, and how ultimately, hopefully, we can solve and provide some value for them. And it excites me because I still hold construction near and dear to my heart after spending nearly 10 years working in it. But I'm happy to be working in a more dynamic space like software to help provide solutions for that industry. So excited to be here and having this discussion.
Excellent, Brian. Thank you. And finally, let's meet Tom Stemm, CEO of Ryvit. Tom?
Thanks. Happy to be here, just like Brian and Christian. Outside of founding Ryvit, I've spent 20 years in software development, 20 years in some type of capacity working with and supporting construction companies in their use of technology. First 10 years or so, I actually sat in the seat, wrote code. So I've got quite a in-depth technical background that I can leverage and kind of bring to the table in terms of not only what Ryvit does today and serving the industry and serving our customers and serving our partners like Raken, but also just in terms of understanding some of the trends that we're seeing in technology and with tech stacks in the space as well. Outside of my role as CEO, founder of Ryvit, I also played an instrumental role in helping with a lot of people know it as AGC XML, moved to COSA, now as the Construction Progress Coalition. I'm chairman of the board, helped co-found that initiative in terms of evolving a lot of the discussion in the industry around open technology standards, integration standards, interoperability. And so from that perspective, have a lot of experience, years of experience working in a capacity to help integrate tech stacks and helping companies use technology more effectively in the way they seek to operate their business. So happy to be here and look forward to the conversation as well.
Excellent, Tom. Thank you for joining us today. And once again, welcome to all of you. This is going to be a valuable discussion. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be talking about construction tech stacks as new types of software and applications hit the market to help construction companies manage their people and projects. It's easy for contractors to wind up with cumbersome tech stacks. As these tech stacks grow, they can become harder to manage, which leads to higher costs, more hands-on work, and a lack of control over valuable information. So today, we're going to talk to our experts about tech stacks, why they're important, how to audit and optimize tech stacks, and the role that integration can play in keeping tech stacks under control. Lastly, we'll share some best practices and tips on getting the most from your tech stack without becoming overwhelmed. We'll also leave some time to ask a few questions at the end. So, let's get started. To set the stage today, let's define the term tech stack to everyone so that everyone's on the same page here. So, Brian, do you want to walk us through what the term means?
Absolutely. To explain simply, a tech stack really refers to a collection of software, apps, and any digital tools that you use to run your construction business. No single piece of software really ever will be able to accomplish everything that a business requires, especially in kind of the dynamic nature of construction. And so that's why in most cases, a construction company really needs to rely on more than one app or platform or software to really achieve its goals and maximize efficiency across all of their operations. Industry-wide, we can see that a number of platforms are being used and that it's continuously on the rise, especially with the COVID pandemic. It really accelerated a lot of the use of software. One example is actually in a 2022 construction technology report from JB Knowledge indicated that over 21% of construction companies use at least 3 apps to manage their daily operations. So, and I think that number is just going to continue to be on the rise. When you consider all of the software being used throughout your offices, you can see how quickly a tech stack can really grow. For example, in construction, your tech stack includes things like field management, accounting, bid management, estimating, project management. It goes on. And there really are a lot of options that are either point solutions or kind of all-in-one solutions. So there's a lot of options out there for contractors. But the biggest thing to think about is that everyone's construction tech stack is unique.
Yeah, and I think to add on to that, it's been interesting to see the evolution, and I've been watching for quite some time. And what's been happening is we went from a situation where the ERP system was largely center of the universe, and maybe the company had an ERP system, estimating solutions, scheduling, a couple of other side applications. And now there's a flood of private equity money moving in and funding startups. Publicly traded companies are investing heavily, like Trimble and Autodesk and others, and Oracle. And so the amount of money that's now capitalizing the tech stack, if you will, is significant. And some of the solutions that are coming into the space do things that other solutions do too. So now we've got competition within products. Think about in one organization, you mentioned, Brian, multiple applications on average in use, but how many systems are within one construction firm are capable of doing RFIs? You could have RFIs in a project management system within ERP, within the project management system, within a pre-con solution. So, something simple, some function like RFIs can be done in multiple platforms, and you still have the holdouts in many organizations that use spreadsheets for that sort of thing. So, I think the challenges that we have is that all of these new technologies are coming into an organization, but they're not falling in line nicely like a jigsaw puzzle where everything all of a sudden is harmonized and working together seamlessly. So the challenge is not just finding the right solutions, but then bringing them together.
Yeah, that's a great analogy to really help visualize, what construction companies are dealing with. So Christian and Brian, you both talked about the uniqueness of construction tech stacks and how no two are alike. So let's talk about, what makes construction tech stacks unique as compared to the tech stacks that other types of businesses might be dealing with. Brian?
Yeah, I think it really starts to help to understand that there's really two unique camps in the world of construction. First, you have your kind of group of companies that I would say is typically under 100 employees and $50 million or less in annual revenue. These companies typically have pretty small tech stacks or maybe no tech stacks at all. They've been working with a lot of the same processes in the industry for decades sometimes. That includes pen and paper, whiteboards, Excel spreadsheets, Word documents, kind of like Christian alluded to. And it doesn't mean that they haven't been operating in a really successful way. It's just that they haven't been leveraging this kind of new wave of technology. And as they move forward with software and begin to build their tech stacks, they're also being introduced to construction software for the very first time. They're just now discovering how technology can improve their business, proving that these companies have been successful for over 40 or 50 years without technology. It's hard to convince them sometimes. A lot of it has to do with a new wave of kind of youthful people entering the industry and having grown up with technology and wanting to leverage that. So we can understand that there's some hesitancy for the change. And some companies maybe wonder, why should I change? They've been swinging a hammer the same way, right, for decades. And so the short answer is really because technology will help them run their business more efficiently. Maybe technology will help them take on more work without hiring more people. Or maybe it'll help them finish more jobs on time, under budget. That's always the goal. Once they typically get into it, we hear most of them say it wasn't nearly as stressful or overwhelming as they imagined to evaluate and implement software. And these smaller companies are dealing with small tech stacks because they kind of limit the number of digital tools and solutions that they're using. But as their tech stack grows, they're in a unique position to take steps to make sure they can maintain controlled growth and not over-purchase software that will be under-leveraged and underutilized.
Yeah, that's a good point, Brian. I assume that, the second group is made up of the construction companies that have more technology experience and, as a result, larger tech stacks, right?
And that's it exactly. The second group is almost a complete juxtaposition of what we talked about just now. They are construction companies with over 100 workers, typically annual revenues exceeding $50 million. An example is my former employer, Turner Construction. They're the largest general contractor in the country in the commercial space. They had so much software built into their processes that we created the Turner Knowledge Network that allowed people to understand what softwares were available to me, what softwares were mandatory, what did I have at my fingertips to leverage on certain projects if I chose to. It was really interesting, and it's fascinating because the software evolution is always happening, and there are so many users testing and trying new softwares that didn't exist 2, 3, 4 years ago. And it's interesting to see how they communicate within the industry and within the organization to try to find the best thing that's going to solve certain problems. Exactly then, Turner Knowledge Network was one way to wrap our arms around our tech stack and make sure we were using the most efficient tools. But the challenges they face are very different because they want to make sure that they aren't over purchasing software that is being under leveraged throughout the organization. And a big point of emphasis too is standardization. They don't want point solutions being leveraged all in different areas of the country and people duplicating efforts in an effort to solve a specific problem. And so while small companies are dealing with the best way to grow their tech stack, large companies typically are thinking about ways to optimize their tech stack and control the growth so that way it continues to really serve the business.
Yeah, one of the other factors I think that seems important in that analogy is the extent of the IT resources available. Turner and other companies of that magnitude certainly have a very large IT presence. They have staff who can help integrate solutions, business analysts that can help streamline processes, where the smaller, more nimble organizations sometimes aren't staffed quite as well. So that can present a challenge. I also think that one of the things we're dealing with in this industry is an enormous inventory of legacy software. So the industry did automate back in the 90s and early 2000s, and they brought on solutions that have not, all of them, gone away. And so now you've got this hybrid of very contemporary solutions with older legacy solutions, and sometimes those don't play well together. The other thing that I would point out that makes this a little bit of a challenge, and I'm sure we're going to hit on this along the way, is that not all of the software vendors seem equally engaged in helping integrate with other solutions. They more or less leave that to your organization, the contractor organization. So even if you have 5, 6, 7 solutions to do various things in a given process, none of those vendors are going to be stepping up to help you integrate that stack. They'll do something specific if asked, but that's not their role. They view that for third parties or people at the IT department within the construction firm. So I think we have some challenges even today in today's very contemporary modern world with IT, that the legacy solutions, the vendor reluctance, and the limited IT resources can be challenges to making all that work.
Yeah, great points there. And that makes a lot of sense. So when it comes to tech stack trends, what are you seeing in construction, especially considering, what Brian mentioned about some companies dealing with small tech stacks while others have very large tech stacks? Tom?
Well, I think, to some of those challenges that both Brian and Christian are speaking to, I think one thing we're seeing in general are attitudes and mindset shifting across the industry, both with respect to technology adoption, as Brian mentioned. Smaller contractors are starting to ask the right questions. How do I grow my tech stack? How do I invest into my tech stack? Larger companies that have already made some of those investments are asking, again, the right questions. How do I optimize the use of my tech stack? How do I get that tech stack integrated? It doesn't mean that that's easy. It doesn't mean that those challenges have gone away. But we're starting to see that there's a lot more attention in construction applied to the tech stack and how it optimizes the construction process, how it optimizes their performance in building the building, if you will. And it's a good trend to see, because it wasn't even a topic of discussion a few years ago. But now it becomes the primary topic of discussion, as some of those firms that are just now making those investments and seeking to make those investments, it becomes a key part of their criteria for selecting new technology to bring into their ecosystem. There's also different dynamics that we're seeing within the workforce. Younger workers entering the workforce, entering the field, they will, take a step back if you give them a pen and paper and tell them to fill out a time card, and they're like, well, why am I not doing this on my phone, right? They expect technology to be at their fingertips. And, we start to see a more natural shift towards that dynamic as there's a competition for talent, just like there's a competition for business within the field. So I think we start to naturally see tech stacks expand. Because of that, I think some of the challenges Christian spoke to are going to remain relevant and prevalent within the industry. How do I select the right technology for my team and for my company? But then in selecting a lot of different tools to run the business now, I've got the challenge of how do I integrate that tech stack, and how do I optimize our use of that tech stack, and how do I really make it work efficiently within the way that we run the business and the way that our teams are executing their roles and working through the construction process and building the building and doing good work for the customer.
Those are good points, Tom. And I would say you and I are seeing many of the same kind of trends. I think that the pressure on the growth of the tech stack is coming from a couple of places. One is internal. Like you said, the more tech savvy workers are definitely demanding better tools. They're learning how to estimate with software when they're coming out of construction school with a degree. Right. They're learning how to schedule with Primavera. They're learning all of these Procore. They're using all of these solutions in school. They can't come out and go to work taking a step backwards. So the demand internally is increased tremendously from 15 years ago. Externally, customers are demanding. So the owners are demanding the general contractors be at the top of their game from a tech standpoint. And then the general contractor, by the same token, turns around and has higher expectation of their subs, of the trade contractors that they're working with. So I think the demand is for better use of tech is both coming from inside and external. I would also say that there is a much greater awareness inside most contractors now of process orientation. And by that, I mean like procure to pay or contract to cash or job cost and change order and forecasting. These process streams that kind of span multiple applications, typically, multiple departments sometimes even, are starting to become understood, and they're part of the focus of process improvement. A lot of our work now, I mean, used to do a lot of software selection and implementation. Now we're coming in and do process evaluation, process improvement, where we take a look at the tools they have and align the tools with the desired business process. How should it be? And I think that's very healthy because it eliminates this sort of siloed mentality that companies have around one application is in one department and they don't have any idea where the data came from before or where it goes after. When you lay it out in a process, it becomes, I think, easier to streamline. Mm-hmm. I would also say that just last point on this is that there's generally now a deeper awareness of the value of data, and we can't mine data. We can't put data in a data warehouse. We can't get powerful business intelligence if our data is less than ideal, is the polite way to put it. And that's what we have right now is we have all these old databases with tons of garbage in them and inconsistent use of systems and processes, which doesn't generate or foster good data. So as the value of good, clean data increases in the organization and management understands that, the emphasis will be on streamlined process and integrated tech stack, in my opinion.
And those are great trends to be aware of, especially when it comes to uncontrolled tech stack growth, right, Christian?
Yes. And I think that's one of the things that IT was traditionally challenged very much with keeping the lights on. We used to say servers, network, architecture, connectivity to job sites. That's what their job was. And what happened was the demands from the organization kind of grew out from under them. And now you had project managers at job sites signing up for box accounts on their credit cards. So now we all of a sudden have applications and data storage just spawning all over the place. And just a project manager wanted to try something else. So they signed up for this or that application. And there wasn't any controlled growth of that tech stack. And it made IT's job almost impossible from a security standpoint, from a data governance standpoint, from a process and training. So I think that the CFO, who typically controlled IT, the president of the organization, companies have now sort of tried to harness that uncontrolled growth of the tech stack and put some governance in place to say, okay, yes, you can try things out, but let's do it in a controlled manner. So I think I think IT has also recognized the need to have an R&D function inside of their department so they can test out or support the testing of applications by various groups in the organization. So there is a level of incubation or innovation, I suppose. In fact, some construction firms now have a director of innovation. And that would, Tom, when 10 years ago, that position never existed. So now we have a director of innovation whose their whole job is to look at new solutions, new innovations, tech related or otherwise, and evaluate them for the viability inside the company and make the ROI case.
Yeah, and I think to your point, I mean, that's what's really setting the stage for integration, right? That evolution of tech trend. Selection is made less by the CIO, CFO type role these days, and it's really coming from the bottom up, right? The project manager in the field says, I need this tool to do my job. He selects the tool and he's off to the races, but it creates a different problem really for those overseeing governance of data and information flow within the organization, because now they've got to figure out, I've got this sprawl of tools among my team, and I'm collecting data in different ways than I've ever collected it before. How do I get that tech stack integrated? How do I get the data into the right place? How do I clean it? How do I make sure the integrity of that data is good? And so I know we're going to kind of talk about integration, here in a few minutes in a lot more depth. But historically, construction companies that use technology didn't even necessarily want to let data in and out, even in the way that they would collaborate with other contractors, right? It was all kind of isolated inside of their ecosystem. And so as we talk about, the trends that we're seeing with more systems coming online, and a lot of those systems, as you mentioned earlier, Christian, like we kind of got these legacy systems that have cemented their place in the industry that are still around, but we're starting to see a lot of more modern solutions kind of come into the stack as well. So as we see that trend continue, we're going to start to see a lot of those walls break down, attitudes are shifting, but ultimately we're going to have to now address the integration concerns, because those are real and relevant to allowing data and access to data to run the business more effectively.
Yes, and we'll be talking more about integration and what that means for the industry. But first, let's talk through why tech stack control is so important in construction. What impact does it make, Brian?
I mean, from a high level view, an uncontrolled tech stack can really be a morale killer, especially when the construction industry hasn't historically been excited about technology. If workers are overwhelmed with, say, 8 or 9 different tools they're supposed to use, they tend to just throw up their hands. I'm not going to use this, right? They just want to go build something. And so in this environment, you want to retain your employees and keep them engaged as much as possible. So you don't want to bog them down with softwares and processes that they don't know how to use and that they don't see as valuable. And so creating an internal reputation for buying software that isn't implemented properly is kind of a huge problem. And so we want to make sure that is taken really seriously. We don't want it to become, hey, look, the company is buying a shiny new tool that really doesn't do anything to provide value for us or the business. And so the more that you allow that to happen, the more difficult it can be for them to get on board in the future. So controlling your tech stack really helps to make sure workers don't get overwhelmed, don't get frustrated. They buy into the process early. They see the value, and that way they're leveraging it the way it's supposed to be used.
And that's a great point if you want employees to use these tools when they have to see the value in them, right, Brian?
No question. I mean, absolutely. Software can be a really big investment. And the goal for software is to reduce the costs and challenges, not increase costs and more headaches. You might implement an RFI solution that is designed to help you more efficiently track RFIs, track changes, document the process, and protect yourself, right? And in many ways, software can a lot of times be kind of like an insurance policy. You're really looking to leverage it to protect yourself. But if there isn't a strong case for how the software will benefit your team, then you're really just frivolously spending money. And so if your teams aren't leveraging software effectively, if they're not using it at all, then there's zero value for the business. So the goal really should be is align your team with what you want to solve and make sure you find a software that provides that value and that your team is ready to go efficiently leverage it in the field.
Yeah, great points there. And now that we've established, what tech stacks are and why they matter, let's talk about who should be managing them. Should it be leadership, the administrative team? Christian, we'll get your thoughts here first.
Yeah, so it's that's a big question and a good one. I would say that in days past, it was definitely the domain of the IT director. But we didn't really have IT directors and CIOs in the industry. We had IT managers and department like network engineers and that sort of thing. And one of the refrains that I used to hear from CEOs all the time was lack of leadership. They didn't feel like there was leadership coming from IT, and not enough anyway. And I think that's changing now. We are seeing more leadership, but it is definitely leadership around security and around cloud strategy and storage and some of these important kind of back office IT functions. But where does the application leadership come from? Some companies have deployed a IT steering committee, and that's a cross-department team of folks that come together once a quarter, look at what they've got, what they need, what should be evaluated next. Are we going to be implementing a new estimating solution? Do we need a new HR package? Do we need what's our data warehouse and BI strategy? So sometimes you can get IT steering committees to help with that if properly implemented. Another role that I think is fairly significant here is that of the business analyst. Now, a business analyst isn't going to provide direction, but a business analyst is super valuable in managing the process evaluation and upgrade work that leads to optimization of solutions, either replacing an existing solution or implementing a better a solution you have better. So the business analyst can work with in estimating or HR or the equipment team or business development team to streamline a process and implement a solution. So we're seeing more companies have a business analyst in place and get exceedingly good value. Last thing I would say on this is that the construction firms have definitely recognized the need to upgrade their IT department. So in addition to possibly adding some folks or at least changing the nature of the roles, so maybe there's not a net increase in bodies, there's a change from back office engineer types to front office sort of customer facing IT personnel like the business analysts. But they're also, I think, elevating the management position within IT. And I've got way more CIO clients now and IT directors, people that are able to sit at the management table when discussing business strategy and direction and talk about the alignment of tech with where the business is going. Evaluating tech all by itself, just to keep up with the marketplace, actually doesn't make a ton of sense. And it can be wasteful and confusing and frustrating. So it's very important, and we preach this all the time, making sure that the technology strategy is aligned with the business strategy and focused on competitive advantage. So I would say those are the key things in terms of who is responsible for managing tech.
Absolutely. And that's really thought-provoking insight about the future of IT and construction, Christian. So keeping that in mind, let's talk a little more about integration, which has come up a few times already. Technology integration remains a big challenge for many construction companies. In the construction technology report, we've been talking about more than half of survey respondents still manually transfer data due to lack of integration. So as construction companies roll out a combination of holistic software solutions and point solutions, what role does integration play in construction tech stacks? Brian?
Yeah, it's going to be a really big role. I like to think about it like this. When you're running a construction project, there are 3 core office workflows that really require a lot of time, effort, and care. And that's change order management, RFIs, and submittals. And these 3 things kind of serve as the nucleus of construction software. And that nucleus might be a little bit different for some companies, but it really covers the bulk of what most contractors need for a solid foundation. And from there, companies start to branch out, considering point solutions. Maybe they want to look at field reporting or drawing management or scheduling, for example. So if you're considering point solutions, you want to take a close look at the platforms that you use to manage those main 3 workflows we just talked about. And many of the software solutions that support those functions can also fulfill other purposes too. If yours can't, then that's where point solutions make sense. Also, sometimes they may offer it, but there might be a point solution that actually provides a more valuable product for your specific use case. One of the most exciting things right now happening in construction is the integration piece. In the past, integration was always on a construction wish list. You wanted your ERP to talk to your construction management software. You wanted your construction management software to talk to your estimating tool, your bidding tool, field management software to talk to your PM software. And it just never really was there. And so integration now makes that possible by reducing manual work, helping to make sure information doesn't fall through the cracks. It's readily available at anyone's fingertips. And that interconnectability is adding so much more value to all of these different construction softwares.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in. I think that's a good way to describe integration. I mean, really integration you can think of as an optimization strategy, right? So, to Brian's point, to Christian's point, as we continue to see the sprawl of tools, I think it's important for people to think about integration as an investment. It really optimizes the way you use your tech stack. It optimizes your return on the investment you're making into that tech stack. And frankly, the more you invest in integration, the more return on investment you'll receive from the technology you're using. Instead of viewing it as a cost, you really have to view it as a double down approach. How do you save more money down the road by getting more automation out of the tools that you're using? It's also a big factor, if not maybe the number one factor that really drives adoption. If users have to input all this data in a point solution that you install in your environment, but then that data is never used to inform a decision, or maybe they can't find the right data when they need it, or the work that they're doing isn't really helping anyone in the back office kind of do their job, and there's like all this additional interaction that has to occur. You're going to see low adoption and frustrated users. So good integration strategy really is an optimization strategy. It really helps you establish the way you're going to move data, who has access to it. It supports adoption of the tools that you're using. And when everyone has what they need at their fingertips to do their jobs more effectively, you're eliminating low value activity, and you're allowing your team to now do the high value activity, the important work, the strategic work, and eliminating, duplicate entry and those types of things.
That's those are some good examples. Also, I guess I wanted to look at just one example that comes to mind for me, and I see quite frequently in the industry, is that of time card management. There are a number of good time card solutions out there, but those now need to be integrated both to payroll and to HR. And what's interesting in construction is you have a high degree of turnover in personnel. So now we've hired a guy in the office, but the field doesn't know it. So the field has the person. They're trying to enter time, and that time card system doesn't acknowledge that person exists. Then they terminate the guy in the field, but the office doesn't know that, and the HR system doesn't know that, so they don't finish up with benefits. So here's three systems that can get out of sync within a week and cause immense frustration, extra work. Back in the old days, and some people might remember this, we used to do time cards in. They get faxed in, they would get Excel spreadsheets sent into the office, and then somebody would key them in. But when you're keying in a timesheet from Excel, you can put any data you want in there, right? There's no validation. So then the clerical people that are entering in timesheets end up getting errors. Well, then they got to pick up the phone and call the superintendent and say what's going on. So the lack of integration, the lack of that data integrity causes immense amounts of lost productivity that you don't get back. And I would also say it causes you to have poor quality of data. Consequently, reports aren't timely. They're not accurate. It causes a low level of confidence in the system itself. So for all the reasons, Tom, you just mentioned, I think integration has to be part of the overall system plan.
Yeah, absolutely necessary.
And so when would you say integration is necessary? How can a contractor decide when to integrate solutions within its tech stack? Tom?
I think they have to begin with the end in mind, right? What will the integration, result in something that moves the needle? To Christian's point, if you need data in the ERP so the executive team can run the financial reports, they need to make decisions. Well, you've got to get the data there. But if you want the data in the ERP just because you're used to it being there, but it's not being used, not a great reason. So you shouldn't integrate data just for the sake of integrating data. You need to understand what that data is going to inform. Does it inform a process? To Christian's illustration, does it inform the HR team of an offboarding and they need to get benefits set up or COBRA established or what have you? Or run that final payroll, right? Does it inform payroll so they can actually pay the people that did the work, and kind of maintain compliance in that regard? And so, the end in mind, I think, is kind of the key. You got to understand what the data is going to inform, whether it's a process or whether it's a person, in terms of how they're going to use that data to move the needle, move the business forward, and ultimately, provide value.
Laura, if you don't mind, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you asked, how do you determine? And I would give you two specific criteria to decide. One is volume. If a transaction, a particular type of transaction is high volume, then I would absolutely consider integration because it's repetitive. It's something that should be integrated to eliminate double keying. The other criteria is risk. If a given process is high risk, and if we don't do it correctly, problems occur, like tracking subcontractor lien waivers or insurance certificates. If a given process is high risk, it should be integrated. So if you put those two on an axis, the high risk, high volume activities should be first on your list of integration.
And so what should construction companies be looking for when they're thinking about integrating software? Are there questions they should be asking, Brian?
Yeah, I would say this: make sure you understand the software's integration capabilities. If your ERP, to the point of Tom and Christian, is if that's your financial center of truth and other software systems can't communicate with it, then that creates one more thing your team has to do manually. If the software offers an integration, then what does it take to make that integration happen? If there's no integration available today, ask what's the roadmap for an integration? When will it be possible? Is it on your roadmap? A software company should be willing to share what's on the roadmap and what isn't. What are their priorities, and do those align with what you're hoping to achieve? If the roadmap reveals that integration isn't a priority for that platform, then it might be time to reevaluate your decision if the integration is something that you truly need.
I think, too, you've got to be a little careful with the software vendor community, and I work with them every day, have an immense amount of respect. But I would say that sometimes when asked about integrations, the answer is, yeah, we have integration technology. Well, they mention they have an API kit, perhaps, and that's about it. and that doesn't mean that they're going to do the work. It doesn't mean that it necessarily ties in with other programs. Sometimes it does. So being mindful of and how well documented it is. There is so much more to integration than just having APIs. APIs are good, but that's not the entire function. So it would seem that a firm, and this should come from IT, from the CIO, what is the standard against which we are measuring integration capability? Web services, APIs, documentation, JSON and versus XML. I mean, there's all sorts of different criteria that we can use. And then who's going to do the work is the other factor. So, and then who's going to maintain those integrations as new software is being upgraded? Not to mention the fact, back in the day when we had on-prem solutions, we could manage all of the tech needed for integrations internally. But as Tom well knows, not all cloud providers are happy to have your little add-on applications in their data warehouse, data center. So if there are restrictions inside of data centers around some of the applications you're using, you can't even add on APIs. So I think there's just a number of complicating factors that make it a challenging environment today, even though the technology is greatly improved over 10 years ago.
And so let's talk about red flags. What are some signs that your tech stack needs attention, Tom?
I think, one of the biggest things I kind of have you watch for is workflow disruption. So think about the work that you're doing, and if it's being impacted because you have to start in one system or tool or platform and then jump over here and do this and another platform and then kind of jump back over and do this in order to just kind of maintain the flow of your work activity. I think that's a really good sign that you're missing some integration capabilities to automate a lot of that interaction for you because you're wasting valuable time moving back and forth. I think, as an example, I guess, a lot of construction companies, most construction companies, they live and die by their WIP reports. So how much manpower is required to really produce that? If it takes a lot of work to produce, tech stack is probably slowing you down. If lots of time is being spent on what we refer to as low value activities, then it's a sign telling you that your tech stack really needs to be optimized. And so people need to place, in my opinion, people need to place a lot more value on their time and how they spend that time in executing the roles that they're performing, for their company. And so, we hear companies say things like, it only takes me an hour or two a week to do X, Y, Z. Well, that's an hour or two a week. And if you, sort of repeat those hours every week for the next 3 years, and, how much time have you wasted if you could have gotten rid of all that time and used it more effectively? And so, more creative work, more productive work, more strategic work is available to you if you invest in integration and if you look for those sort of red flags, if you will.
Great, thanks. That sounds like some important red flags. So let's jump into best practices here, and we've identified 3 pieces of advice to share with our audience today. So Tom, I'll let you kick us off here.
Yeah, I think first of all, it's kind of important to note there's no one size fits all, right? I think Brian said it at the top. Every construction company's tech stack is unique, and so you don't want to necessarily let your tech stack get too large, but you also don't want it to be inappropriately small just for the sake of having a small tech stack. So kind of double-edged sword, right? Finding the right balance is key. A lot of manual work that results from your tech stack being too small can happen when your tech stack is too large and uncontrolled also. So either way, whether it's too small or too large and uncontrolled, your challenge will be getting good information. And so this really comes back to some things Christian was talking about with respect to good data and data quality, that, if you're ultimately, missing data or have bad data, the data and the information people need to run the business better is going to not be there. And so if it's being collected manually on pieces of paper, you're not going to have access to it. If your tech stack is too big and not integrated, the data may not be where it needs to be when it needs to be there. And so, in other words, you can't necessarily control it. And so if the size of the tech stack isn't necessarily the issue, so what really matters is whether you have a good strategy behind how you use your technology and how you manage your data. And integration is really a tactic to help you manage and optimize use of your data. Where is the data being collected? Where does it need to move? And how does it get access?
And let's talk a little bit about that strategy behind the idea of how to get started, Tom.
Well, I think the first thing to focus on is really separating the concepts of accessing data and managing data. So, before you worry too much about how you'll manage your data, your first priority should really be to make sure you have access to it. Christian kind of spoke to this, like a lot of people think they're covered if they have an API, which is really a different, word for a database, right? It's like the cord on your lamp. If you don't plug it in, you're not going to get power and you can't turn the thing on. And so an API gives you the ability to access data, but you still have to have someone help you manage it, which I think, is the job of someone like Ryvit, or, a term that a lot of people know as middleware, like it's becoming inevitable. That technology in the middle needs to be there to really help you manage your data effectively once you have access to it. And if you don't have access to the data, then you can't manage it. And so proper data management, again, looks different for everyone, but it's probably one of the most important things you need to think about as you look at your tech stack and you look at how to optimize your investment in that tech stack.
Right. And what other pointers would you share? Brian, what are your words of wisdom on this topic?
I think it's really important for companies to conduct tech stack audits. There's many ways you can do that. If I was an executive manager at a company in the construction space, I would go to each person who's either recommending or leading the charge on each type of software that I use. Typically, every company has a champion. If those individuals don't exist, then I would find either up-and-coming folks within my industry or my organization or people that I know and trust to do audits. And I would ask these people to conduct audits of our current software system and how they're being used. Important questions are, is the software being used on all of our projects? Is it being used effectively? Can its positive business impacts even be quantified? And so getting those answers will help you kind of establish a benchmark of how we're using the software today. And from there, you can determine whether the solution you're paying for still minimizes the pain points that they were intended to address in the first place. If they don't, maybe you need to invest in new software or a new solution to fix that existing problem. Maybe there's new pain points that didn't exist when you bought that software. And then maybe there's a new opportunity to provide an additional solution or replace a solution. A year from now, you want to be able to go back and ask the same questions again and start that process. It should be pretty much like an annual review for contractors. Things that you want to understand is you want data, right? You want to understand, what is the software doing for my company? Is it saving me money? How much money is it saving me? Is it saving me time? How much time? And during this process, it's really important to remember that the only thing software is designed to do is address a pain point. If it's not addressing a pain point, then it is not serving you and your business. Maybe the biggest challenge is getting accurate information from the field in real time. Maybe it's effectively communicating changes with an architect on a project. Making sure that you figure out that pain before investing in technology is the most critical part. And so you want to not just use software to use software. That's how tech stacks get out of control. You want to have a clear business use case for it, so that way it will really effectively serve your business.
Good point, Brian. I would add, I think, to that, we do a lot of these kind of process audits where we look at both process and system use of technology. One of the things we're kind of fond of doing is we use Visio, but you could use any Lucidchart or any other, and actually flow chart an entire process, say procure to pay, and look at, once you lay out all the steps and all the processes, all the people involved, then you can take a look at the different technologies that are being used. And what you might find is, in a simple process like procure to pay or contract to cash, that there's 3-4 different systems being used. And then you can rate how well those systems are being used, how often is the data being rehandled. Then you've got a little bit more of a empirical, objective measure of what's wrong, what's broken, and what the opportunity for improvement is. Then you can try to put some value on that and then determine whether or not we need to fix the systems we have, pull one of those systems out and tie the others together, or perhaps even shop for a whole new system. So visualizing your processes goes a long way to help diagnosing and creating the efficiency.
Yeah, great points there. And that's great advice to help companies keep cost in check as they optimize their tech stacks. So the final piece of advice we wanted to share today involves the importance of communication and justification as tech stacks are being built. So Christian, would you share your thoughts on that?
Sure. I think generally we don't hear a lot of frustration with the growth of tech stack as long as it's toward some goal and as long as it's achieving the results that are expected. I do think that both the role of the CIO and perhaps even the president is to communicate a little bit of vision around where technology is taking the company and how it's going to be leveraged. A lot of times companies don't even know what the vision is for the company. Where is the firm heading? And how is technology going to be leveraged? And what is our technology strategy? Some companies should know generally for the next, I'd say 24 months, what the priorities are for new applications, for integrations, for data warehouse, for those kinds of things. And it's good to have them communicated, because without that, you get a lot of what are called shadow IT projects where individuals or groups within the organization just go off and start doing some of their own things, creating their own initiatives, if you will. So I think good, clear communication around tech direction is key and pretty squarely lands with the CIO, IT director in the firm.
Yeah, those are really great points, Christian. Like you mentioned, with many things, it all comes down to communication. It has to happen, and I can speak from experience on that. Maybe your San Diego team has a problem that they're struggling with, and they're trying to decide how to fix it. Meanwhile, no one realizes that your same team in Buffalo had this issue a year ago, and they found a solution that the San Diego team has no idea about. It's really important that we're proactive with our communication, especially in larger organizations. We don't want to wait until something is wrong we see that all the time. We want to make sure that we're effectively communicating and that we're sharing those use cases and that success. So that way we're not repeating efforts and kind of wasting resources. It's really often how many times a construction company reaches out to software companies after they've had a bad experience. A change order they couldn't defend because of lack of documentation is an example. It's typically a knee-jerk reaction then to go and buy software, which we want to prevent problems from happening again. But we also want to be very, very critical of, are we buying the right software at the right time for our business? And so I understand if you lose a lot of money in a change order, if you have a financial impact, you think you want to confirm that you find the right software to help protect yourself, but we want to make sure that everyone's methodical with the way that they focus on this, and communication is key. Is a lack of software really the reason things went wrong? If you had software, would you have been able to fix that issue? And if you can identify a software that truly will align with the needs that you identified, then that's the proper way to move forward. And so we want to make sure that looking at multiple solutions can really help you zero in on the right solution for your team, and make sure that you don't make knee-jerk reactions, because we want to make sure that the right decision is made at the right time for the right business. And again, it all goes down to identifying those critical pain points. If I can identify a software that solves that pain point for me, then that's a fantastic kind of situation to be in.
Excellent. Well, Brian, Tom, and Christian, I think that's a wonderful note to end on. We're nearing the end of our presentation today, and want to thank you for joining us. We didn't have time for our Q&A session here because the conversation was just so great and the information you guys were sharing. But please know that if you did submit a question, that we will follow up later via email after the conclusion of this webinar. So again, huge thank you to our three panelists today. And we also want to thank you, our audience members, for listening in on this conversation. Today's webinar will be available on demand. You will soon receive an email with a link so you can rewatch or share with your colleagues. Have a great day, everyone.